Today my guest is Matt Van Horn. Matt, how you doing?
Good, David. How you doing?
I'm doing great. What are we going to talk about?
Well, today we're going to talk a little about Expression Blend and what we can do with it with Silverlight.
Expression Blend. I own a copy of Expression Blend, but I don't use it much. So
Well, hopefully by
be
the end
gentle. All right, that's all I'm saying.
hopefully we can make you interested in at least giving it a try. So what we're going to be talking about is really geared towards Silverlight 3 with Expression 3. Obviously, Silverlight 4 is out.
It just came out like what, 3 days ago, 4 days ago?
Something like that.
Yeah.
Big news.
Uh-huh.
But some of the stuff in there is new stuff that we don't necessarily need to worry about yet. The nice thing with Silverlight is since 2 and on, the feature set for most of what you're going to do has been pretty consistent.
Okay.
So
tell me how are you using Expression Blend?
well, I mean, I'm a big fan of Expression Blend for prototyping applications. I mean, especially with SketchFlow, which perhaps we could talk about that some other time. That's a phenomenal tool.
Uh-huh.
For I don't know if you or your viewers are familiar, but SketchFlow is a tool that allows you to actually specifically design prototypes and do storyboarding and interactive storyboarding that you can then allow users to give feedback on, so that they can actually interact with it, draw notes on it, and the whole thing, and give it back to you. It's extremely useful in that respect.
And that ships with Blend?
Yes, it's my understanding that the next version requires a separate license or something like that. I'm not sure. I've heard that rumor.
Okay.
But yeah, it comes with Expression Blend 3.
And what else are you using Blend for?
Well, I mean, the data binding. The data binding with Expression Blend, because let's face it, for those of you who aren't using 2010, you don't have the ability to use any kind of interactive design in Visual Studio for Silverlight, sadly. So you can see
So
that.
when we say you don't have the ability to do interactive design,
Well, you have to type it out.
Guy. Oh, so
XAML.
if I'm a developer and I'm building WPF for Silverlight applications, I am editing XAML. I'm not looking at what you see is what you get type of editor.
You are seeing what you see is what you get,
Okay.
but it's not interactive.
Not interactive being what?
Well, for WPF, that's a different story. For Silverlight, unfortunately, you don't have the properties tab so that you can interact with everything.
Okay.
It's all just can't touch it.
Okay,
So you can't drag and drop. You can see the control rendered,
Okay.
but you
So you
can't.
can see it, but you can't modify the WYSIWYG part. If you
Yeah.
want to modify it, you have to go into the XAML and modify the XAML, and that change is reflected in the WYSIWYG. which is
Yes.
stitching it. Okay.
Your choice is really to use Blend. So with Blend, you have the ability to drag and drop controls, do your layout, data bind right on the fly. So any object you have in your project, you're able to do what you see is what you get data bind.
Okay.
And
And limitations in Visual Studio don't exist in Blend.
well, I mean, yes, correct. Yeah, they are. Blend is really designed. It's a core. It's a separation of responsibility. Your designers are in the Blend environment. Your developers are in the Visual Studio environment. And now one of the interesting things that they did is there's actually in Visual Studio you can right click on the XAML and it jumps you to view in Blend. And in vice versa, and in Blend, you can right-click and say View in Visual Studio. So a lot of times, I spend my time using both tools because.
Which are you? You're a developer more than a designer, right?
Well,
You're a diviner.
sometimes you got to wear. What's the word you use?
Diviner.
Diviner. I have never been called divine, but I'm not opposed to it. So. Yeah, so a lot of my time is spent using both tools. So I'll tab between them. And I prefer editing code. You can do code editing. There's full IntelliSense in Expression Blend. I'm just personally not a fan of doing it like that. I'm a Visual Studio guy. I like it. So,
Okay.
But for the actual design time work, I like to use.
Okay, so this is fascinating. I think the reason that there are two tools, the reason Microsoft built it this way, is because they saw two different audiences. They don't see you.
Mhm.
They see the designer and they see the developer as two different people, and they're handing projects back and forth, they're handing
Yep.
solutions back and forth to each other, and they want each of them to work in their own environment.
Which makes sense because you have people who are very good at design and you have people who are very good at code.
Yeah, left brain.
And then you have people that got some knowledge in both areas.
Right.
But they personally I consider myself a developer. Can I do design work? Yes. Is it the best? clearly it's not my 9 to 5. You know, the designers I know do a way better job. But can I lay out something? Can I, you know, make it look presentable? Absolutely. So, you know, I think that really, you hit the nail on the head. Generally speaking, you have one person using Blend, one person using Visual
So
Studio.
tell me about your workflow. When you're building a web application, it's got some, it's a Silverlight application, it's got a lot of visual elements to
Mhm.
it, and it's got a lot of business logic to it. Where do you start?
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of componentization, obviously, because reusable code is just beautiful. So one of the great things with Silverlight is, you know, you can, especially with the dependency properties and all the new introductions to WPF, is the ability to do just really slick, easy to use data binding, so that you don't even have to, you know, touch the code. You can do your data binding totally in Blend. You know, you can train your designers to, when they're designing this layout, design the layout, but bound to real data. You don't have to wait for a designer to, you know, build the method of getting data and using a repeater. So, you know, obviously with, you know, ASP web forms, you know, you have like a repeater control.
Right.
And, you know, your designer maybe lay it out,
Okay.
and then you still need to get that data. The developer has to do that. With this, you have this whole sample data ability in Expression Blend, so you can create your own sample data set. So if you know the structure is going to be, you're going to have a property that's name, address, telephone number, blah 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 blah. All you have to do is, there's a little, it's a like a little wizard, and you can say, well, not so much a wizard, it's like a toolbar on the side, and you just say new collection, and then you start naming properties, and they even have built-in dummy data types like name, address, names, addresses, first names, last names, company names. I mean, dollars, dollar signs, phone
Yeah,
numbers,
common things will be in this.
all kinds of stuff like that, and it'll generate 5, 6, whatever results, and it's an XML file. You can add more if you want. That way, you can actually prototype it and see lifelike data actually as you're designing it.
All right, this is a departure from most of the applications I've seen. When we've got designers and developers working together, I either see designers working in a tool like Photoshop, something they're familiar with, giving PDF documents to
Your
developers,
wireframes.
and wireframe of some kind that's not editable. And
Far
they say,
from.
make this work, and I look at it and I say, "There's no way in hell I'm going to make that
Then
work."
see,
Just
and
look at
here's
these
why: because you can't do this, you
forms
can't.
aren't round, and
Yeah, and I mean,
well, maybe that's not true with Silverlight, but still.
well, here's the beautiful thing about it. It really is the first. Now, someone might critique this,
I'll
but
just say that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the other way I see it is that the developers will build this ugly, crappy application, and
Guilty,
they'll
yeah.
hand it back to the designer and say, "Here, make this look pretty." I don't think that's very efficient either, because then
Yeah.
they sort of scratch their heads and they've got this paradigm to work with, you know, HTML. Or, it's usually not even HTML. It's designing. It's building something like ASP.NET. It's hard for a designer to modify ASP.NET.
and I think it's yeah. I mean, it's a little more complicated. The nice thing with this is you really do have true separation of responsibility. You can build the great thing with this, you're not dependent on a developer to populate this before you can see what it's going to look like.
Right.
You can have it populated yourself with your own sample data.
Right.
And then, so you can hand over to the developer something that you know is going to come out and look the exact same way once real data is used.
And he can modify that, and he can put code behind it, or code
So, yes,
business
you're-
logic attached to it.
Exactly. Your job as a designer, right? And here's the thing, with visual states, you can actually do workflow animations, and you don't need to know any code. And the great thing is the developer then, in the background, when the code loads, and honestly, with data binding, you can figure out on your own. There's these behaviors that you can use and other tricks in there to figure out what workflow it is based on, if you know the way this object is that you're going to be working with, which, okay, that's a little beyond the scope of what a designer typically can do, but this environment's so easy to learn that it's not outside the scope of what they can learn to do quite easily.
Okay.
Is, you know, for the first time you really have something that the developer doesn't need to wait for the designer, because all they have to worry about is data access. How are you getting it in either WCF, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Or, and your designer, meanwhile, they're laying everything out, they're using real controls, and they're really binding it to dummy objects, and then the developer just comes back in and says, oh, okay, well, this reference is now going to go to this.
Yeah, so this is more of an iterative process where your designers and your developers are working in parallel. Neither one of them is blocking the other one.
Yeah, because how many
You're not waiting for the other one.
and And that's the thing. How many times is, if you use Team System, you want to work with a file, oh, no, man, I'm already working on that. I'm working on this control right now. Oh, well, but you're a designer. Well, yeah, but
Gotta make the corners round.
got to make those corners round, man. People pay for round corners. So the nice thing is with componentization, you can really truly pack all your business logic into each component. So each component can be self-aware of what it's doing. So you can the beautiful thing is this whole data context thing that you have. So you can say, are you familiar with the way data context works in Silverlight WPF?
Tell me.
Okay. Well, this is great. So they came up with this idea because they've obviously seen how programs are written. Things tend to relate to each other, right? So let's say you have a div, and in that div you're going to have 20 drop-down lists. Chances are most of those drop-down lists are related somehow, aren't they?
Yep.
Otherwise, why would they be in the same section on the screen? Now, the beautiful thing with data context is you can have an object that says, I'm going to be pulling, here's what I'm going to be doing for everything that lives under it. I'm going to be working with this object. So with data context, you can say, let's say you have an object called person, and you're on the personal information. In Silverlight, we'll call it a grid. It would be a grid. That's what it's called. That's what so you're on the personal information grid. Well, all that personal information is going to be in the data context of person. We know that's going to be person. So what we can do in Silverlight, right, is we can come in and with Blend, we can say the data context of person, of the personal info, is going to be an object of type person.
Okay.
And that's all from a drop-down list, or not a drop-down list, but it's a little dialog that comes up, and we can pick any object that exists in our project.
Okay.
So now what we can do is go to any drop-down list on there and say the data source or the selected value is, and we bring up the data binding dialog, and here's a drop-down of, or a tree view, rather, of all of our different properties of that object, because we know the context is type person.
Okay, so the idea behind that is that we've got some stateful information. Like we know, for example, which person we're talking about at any given time. And if we swap that, we say, all right, now we're talking about Matt, and all these
Yes.
controls inside of this div are all reflecting the properties associated with Matt. And suddenly we change. All right, now we're talking about Dave. Dave's a different person. All these controls are changing, and they reflect
Excellent.
that. They're instantly done
And the
without code.
Without code, and that's what's important. So the great thing is all these codes that live under that, all these controls that live under, because remember, these are still controls. They live under this grid. This grid is giving them contextual information. When that context of the grid changes, they all update because they're all directly bound to that data context.
Okay, all right.
And that's something that you just simply can't do that seamlessly in web or Win forms.
Now without writing some code.
Exactly. So the beautiful thing here is, and that's not a difficult concept for a designer to understand what's going on. And so the designer can implement this themselves, and they can use the sample data sources and realistically produce a very usable test that you can interact with, play around with, and help get that sale.
Okay, you're doing this for line of business applications.
Yeah.
All right.
The company I used to work for, we did a lot of stuff like this. We
Okay,
did,
you just went to work for Infragistics.
Yeah, I work for
Congratulations.
Infragistics now. Thank you.
All right. That's a good place to wrap up. But before we go, where can people find out more about you?
Well, I have a blog, anythingtheycando.com. I'm a big fan of showing people that there's no reason why you can't figure out the stuff that other people are doing. So, periodically I get around to posting on it. I've been a little slow recently, but and also infragistics.com. You can check out some of the stuff we're doing over there.
All right, Matt, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Boy, it's great to have friends who are as interested in technology as you.